Welcome back, friends. You're just in time for the Johnny Brew Show.
What's going on, everybody? My name is John Brookhagen, host of the Johnny Brew Show, and welcome to another wonderful episode as we continue to turn Nevada red here in 2022. I know you guys are probably dying just to hear from me, but we have got so many great candidates that every single episode we're going to be highlighting another one, and we're in for quite a treat. We have got someone who is running for United States Senate, a former beauty queen, and if I had to find one word to describe her, it would be Christian. And her name is Sharelle Mendenhall, and she's running for the United States Senate. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Johnny.
Very good. How you doing?
I'm amazing.
Yeah, you excited?
I'm very excited.
Yeah, I wanted to just start the episode off by playing, this was a while ago, about 9 months ago, you announced your candidacy,
right.
And this is how it went. Play a tape.
So I'm so excited to introduce Sharelle, my friend, here to support her for Nevada Senate.
My name is Sharelle Mendenhall, and I'm running for U.S. Senate here in Nevada. I feel that God has led me down this path, and He's taken me through the experiences necessary to be standing here today to lead us in this fight. I know many of you might not know how to get started and want to help, but that's what I'm here for. I want to help you guys get involved because I hear so many people who care. I may not know the answer, but I know the right person to point you to and to get you where we need to go as a state and as a country.
All right, so I mean, that sounds great. But, you know, we're going to be sitting here for an hour. We're going to get past the one-liners and past the great quotes. But what was it that motivated you to run?
One of the biggest things is I've been involved in politics for quite a while, and I was volunteering, I was supporting, I was trying to even educate friends on the different positions and who we should be voting for that stand for our values. And still things were kind of going away from the traditional American values. And so I had, you know, someone originally in kind of
what are the traditional American values?
Family. You know, family is so important. I think that is very quickly eroding. You can pop on social media and see that it is almost, you know, to use a popular term, uncool. You know, to be traditional, to sit down, to have family dinner, to have those values, to believe that we need to be morally intact.
And then you say, you know, like it's becoming like more normal to be abnormal.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, like whether you're teaching in schools or you're talking to people in general, I'm almost feeling like to wear a collared shirt is being a rebel now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now,
yeah.
If you don't have a tattoo everywhere or, you know, which tattoos are great, piercings are great, but it feels like that's the norm.
Right.
Whereas when I was growing up, it was weird to have a tattoo or
right.
a big, you know, and now it's become the norm, and now people who are nuclear family oriented, church oriented, education oriented, merit or success oriented are like the outcasts of society these days.
Absolutely.
Well, let's start. You grew up in California. I've been on social media too long. I've started to just call it California from lately. But you were born in Bakersfield.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you left Bakersfield?
I was about 2 years old. So
all right, so not a lot of memories.
No.
And you ended up moving up into Oregon, is that right?
Correct.
So, I mean, you went from one progressive state to an even more progressive state. Was Oregon as progressive as when you were growing up? Because I know now they're basically the epicenter of progressivism. And when you were growing up there, I remember when I was growing up, Oregon was more of a nature, the Great Pacific Northwest type of deal. Mm-hmm. It wasn't known for its liberalism.
Right.
So what was it like for you to grow up in Oregon?
And I think that one of the big things I want to point out is that there are cities that represent states that misrepresent what the entire state stands for. So I lived in the rurals, almost my entire life. And in that, it was not communist.
It was quite conservative.
It was very conservative.
Did you live in the part of Oregon? I think, if I'm remembering correctly, they were trying to secede and become part of Idaho.
No,
Or was
no.
that Washington?
So, well, either way, it was just like I was on the West Coast.
Oh, you were all
Yes,
around the
yeah,
West, so
yeah,
you weren't in that terrain.
No, yes, I wasn't in that terrain.
But it was still conservative, even though you were by the water.
Yeah.
And then I heard that you grew up poor,
Yeah.
relatively poor, and you even talked about not even sure if you were going to eat 3 meals a day and stuff like that. Tell me about that. How old were you? What were you going through a little bit?
So my dad, when we moved from California, he sold his business and equipment operating. So
Okay.
heavy equipment operating, down in Bakersfield. Sold the business and, moved up to Oregon, and he took a job in the timber industry. And the timber industry up there is a very big industry, but there were ebbs and flows, of when things were good and when things were bad. And so when things were bad, there were times where I remember, my mom, taking us to go to get help and support from specific local shelters and
Whether
things
it's
on
a
the
church or a government-run facility
Correct.
or whatnot.
Yeah. But the beautiful thing about that too is at the same time, family values and always giving back. My family always would take us to the soup kitchens to serve others that were the homeless
It's
and things like
amazing that some of the people who are serving the underprivileged are really people who kind of need help themselves. They're
Absolutely.
really not killing it in life. They have a little bit. They're grateful for what they have, and they want to spread it.
Correct.
And then sometimes you have other people that have the whole world at the tip of their fingertips, and they're not really showing up at a soup kitchen or at a charity drive.
Right.
So tell me about your family growing up. Your parents were never divorced, and you had siblings. You want to tell me about what your family looked like?
So I had 3 sisters, and I think
Are you the oldest?
I have 1 older and 2 younger.
All right. And they're all girls?
All girls,
God
no
bless
boys.
you.
And we grew up in the country, in the sense that we had some, acreage, and my dad was, and had grown up on a farm in a ranch in California. And so he took some of those values and those pieces and brought those to Oregon. So we raised chicken, we had goats, we had sheep, and every year, so Future Farmers of America or 4-H, we were involved with that. So that was something that I think that was really...
4-H, I haven't heard of that in a long time. I remember 4-H used to have all their commercials and everything.
Yeah. And so we raised, animals in order to know the process, which was really amazing because, as a kid, you don't realize what they're doing and how they're teeing you up to run a business. But it's, making sure that you take care of this animal, that you learn to show it properly, present it, right. So to speak. And also then you go out and actually talk to businesses to come and invite them to the auction at that point when you're selling your sheep. And so you're presenting yourself.
Yeah, and these skills that you're discussing are the things that I'm most worried about our youth.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about the responsibility of caring for an animal, because if
Right.
you forget, it dies.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you forget your homework and you beg your teacher for some extra time, or
Right.
your mom yells at you and says you're going to turn that in for 80%.
Right.
You don't take care of an animal, they suffer.
Right.
And
In addition to that, just something that's like a standard, they don't make weight. And you actually, if you don't make sure that they make weight, then you can't even show it. So there are very strict rules and guidelines. So you're monitoring, you're taking care of.
and responsibility for your actions. 'Cause
Absolutely.
If you don't do it the right way, you're going to pay the consequence.
Absolutely.
And then on the other hand, you're talking about marketing yourself and getting out into the community. And
Correct.
These kids, we're going to get into this later, but I just see like the kids who would still want to wear a mask even though they don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, that makes me so mad over the psychological operation and the damage that it's done to kids. For a child to want to go to school with the mask, not because they're afraid of getting sick even, but because they just feel it like Linus's little blanket, it's like a...
Absolutely.
And I feel like, these kids... You take out a camera, they cover their face, you try to talk to them, all you get is one-word answers. If you were out selling yourself or selling your family's business to, prospective buyers or people at the show and stuff like that, or even later on as a beauty queen, you can't give these one-word answers. You have to be personable.
Yeah.
And people don't know how to represent themselves or be proactive for themselves.
All good points.
All right. So then... tell us about high school and what you did directly after high school.
So high school. So actually the first part of high school, which is not talked about often, but, when I was a young girl, I remember this so vividly. I was in 2nd grade, and my mom got a letter from my teacher, and I was, pretty shy, pretty quiet, never got in trouble. And I walk into the house. My mom has her back to me, and she says, Sharelle, there's a letter from your teacher. And I was like, mortified. Like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, what did I do? Like, I knew I must be in trouble for some reason. I was like, what happened? What does it say? She's like, she doesn't even turn around. She's like, I just want you to read it. And so I go and I pick it up, and I still remember it was from Mrs. Buxton. Mrs. Buxton. And as I start reading it, she starts describing how I'm not challenged in school, and that I will finish my work in half the time and then flit around and tell everyone else the answers.
Right.
And so I wasn't challenged. So they ended up putting me in it was like almost like a hallway, because we were a very small school, but it was like a closet space, and it was myself and this administrator of this test to test me out, because I wasn't
so
being challenged.
Jump up to 3rd grade.
Correct. And I remember it, and I was already young for my class. And so I read it, I did that, I did the program, and then eventually, because I wasn't challenged, my mom did give me the option. She wanted me to choose, and I wanted to stay with my friends, at that point.
What 7-year-old doesn't? You want to hang out with the 9-year-olds who are starting to go through puberty and guys with beards, or do you want to hang out with your 6-year-old friend? For sure.
And so, what happened is we ended up getting homeschooled. So my mom switched to homeschooling for us.
Wow, and this is back when?
So I can't even remember the grade. I would have to look at it.
Late 90s or early 2000s?
Yeah. So I was born in '84. So it was within that program, which wasn't popular at that time. There was a few.
That's right. But now homeschooling is the rage.
Yes, it is.
Back then it was you were the outcast, back to the outcast.
Oh my gosh, back to the outcast. But something that I think was really incredible, and that was all the way up into part through high school, was that she gave us our packets, and if you finished your packet by a certain amount of time, then you were done.
Right.
You had this ability to sit down, focus, get it done, and then you actually had free time. You could read.
This is what you were looking for in the first place.
Yeah.
And even when you were misbehaving, you were going around trying to help out the other kids. I got a student that reminds me just of you. And that's, infinity. We don't care about how old you are. Where are you in your mathematical journey?
Yeah.
And let's get started right there. Make sure your foundation's good and move forward.
Which is huge.
That's it.
Which is huge.
You don't have to keep going over something you know already just because other kids your age don't know.
Right. And that's where boredom sets in. That's where you're not challenged. And that's where I think kind of people's attention shifts instead of doing just this baseline. But like you're saying, you actually meet them right where they're at in order to challenge them. And when you're challenged, which was the same thing in homeschool, she challenged us.
Do you know what your IQ is?
I actually don't.
You don't?
No.
I'm guessing it's probably high.
Yeah.
You like math?
I love math.
Really?
I do.
Did you go to college or anything?
I actually did, and then I dropped out because it was the same kind of process for me. It felt boring. I would do it. I would finish.
Yeah, that's why I dropped out of college.
But that was one of my pieces. I would do it, and I loved it. But at the same time, I think the most important value that I got out of that was I didn't have a mom. I didn't have a teacher telling me I had to show up. It was my schedule that it made sure it's like I got in, I got it done, and got out. Because I ended up doing my schooling online. And that was in between. Which
also worked with your pace.
Yes, it worked with my pace. It worked with, being able to work, and make money. So it actually, integrated both things. But I think that was one of the biggest values I had, was that even one thing that I challenged was my person teaching me business, because I was going for business. I asked the question, and he'd never owned a business before.
Right.
And I was like,
and that's rampant among our university professors.
Right. And I was like, I'm trying to start a business. You're telling me to do this mock-up, which I actually did when I was in FFA. Right. I've already done this process. I'm doing this in college.
A hobby for
yes. And now I'm here, and you're teaching me kind of the same principle, and I'm going to do a mock-up. I'm going to do a flyer. I was like, I've done this before. I'm wasting my time.
It's like we're playing house. I played house when I was in high school, pretending to open up a business. I want some implementation.
Correct.
You might have been better off talking to, say, drug dealers or something, who actually have owned a business and are actually marketing and distributing and stuff like.
That's extreme, but I get it.
I only use that parallel because I just happen to, too much with the social media. But I saw something talking about how if you wanted to open a business, you'd probably be more you learn more from a drug dealer who's owned a business than you would from a college professor who's never done anything but gone to high school, gone to college, returned to college as a professor.
Right.
And they're purely academic.
Yeah.
Pardon me with my poor examples. I'm famous for that. I could tell you some others, but I'll get in trouble. I need to leave my bad examples in the rearview mirror. What did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a kid?
I don't know that I specifically knew what I wanted to be. I just wanted to make an impact. I think that that's always just kind of been like my heart. Right. And that's actually part of what led into pageantry. I wanted to have a platform in order to give back, and you do things on your own, and so often people just look at you as a face in the crowd,
right?
Unless you can bring people together, and that was part of why I ended up running in the first place, or to compete.
And about a month ago, we had Miss Teen USOA Teen Nevada, Vasilia Boskovic here, and she's running on a platform of Time, Truth, and You, or something like that.
Okay.
What was your platform?
Each year it was different, but I would choose a different charity, and one of the most recent ones was actually human trafficking that I chose.
Right.
And that was a big deal for me because I want to make sure that everyone was aware that every 30 seconds a child goes missing.
Well, and that, brings something up that I was reading about you during the research, that you have a sister that has been missing for over 3 years.
Yeah, as of February 17th, in 5 days, she will be missing 4 years.
For 4 years. Mm-hmm. And can you give us some details? Where was she? What are some of the events that surround her disappearance, and your suspicions and your hopes?
I'm going to keep that brief so that I don't, go too emotional.
As comfortable as you are with it.
And so they found her purse a block from where she was last seen, and we haven't seen or heard from her since. She was up in Montana, and I think one of the biggest things that people don't realize is the impact on the family, and grief does a lot of things,
right.
And it can either pull you together or push you apart. And all of us dealt with it differently. My mom, my other sisters, my dad, and it was definitely hard to process because there's a difference. My grandpa had died in January, and we get to grieve that. That was hard, right. But you get to say goodbye,
right?
But you don't when someone goes missing. You have an open void. You don't get to say goodbye. You have different family members having hope, some wanting to almost do a memorial and move on, and some are fighting. It's just, it's so divisive in nature because grief does different things to different people.
Right, and stress and anxiety and the desire to move on versus the desire to not give up hope. And then all of a sudden people are, going through different phases of grief, which don't necessarily mesh with each other.
Right.
And being that they found evidence of say a purse or something lends itself to the fact that she didn't run away with some guy that she wasn't supposed to run away with.
Right.
She was, quite possibly abducted or something like that. And has there been any kind of revelations since her disappearance?
No, we have a mutual friend who said, even down in Bozeman, he's like, her case ran across my desk and it was cold, absolutely cold. No leads, no nothing. They had messaged us at points. The detective said they were sending out cadaver dogs. My dad got messages saying that if he didn't pay up, that they were going to
give up the search.
No, this was someone trying to extort.
Your dad got a ransom call.
Yeah.
And
messages.
Was there any validity to it, or do you think it's somebody that might have had a scam going?
It possibly a scam. I'm not sure. At these points, some of the biggest things, it's hard to know. But it's right. And when you're in the midst of it, you have no idea, and you're getting these messages, and it's just it's ugly, it's horrible, and I can't even believe if it is or was an extortion that people can do that.
Right. Well, God bless her. I hope either she's resting in peace or she's alive and doing well, and hopefully we'll be reunited with you.
Right.
But that brings me back to you talking about, I know one of your platforms is, say, human trafficking, from the border to living in Las Vegas to living in California, and now obviously with this personal anecdote regarding your sister. Tell us about what you know and what you want to do about human trafficking.
So, as I stated, just as far as the statistic, every 30 seconds a child goes missing. So we need to make sure that we're putting all eyes and all hands on deck to making sure that we move this needle, because families do not need to be going through this. And so often, people talk about just these mass numbers and how can you make an impact. And I say that if you make a difference to one family, it's that starfish story.
Right.
I made a difference to that one.
Right.
And so it's one by one, but we do need to be educating. So first and foremost, Nevada is highest per capita.
And I know that, and it makes me so furious when I see these newspaper articles saying Nevada is 9th in the nation in child trafficking. And I'm like, I'm a math guy, and I love numbers, but at the same time, you could always take statistics and manipulate them.
Yeah.
If we're going to go Nevada, well, yeah, we're, 9th in the nation, but we're also 43rd in population. Don't quote me on that. I just made that up. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but then when you go per capita, we're number one, and it's so misleading because we all know that this is the city of sin. This is the adult playground. This is I was explaining to my wife a couple of weeks ago. She was talking about there was a fight or somebody had a gun in the thing, and I said, you got to understand. Think about every single criminal in America.
Yeah.
Where do you think they go on vacation?
Right.
They're not going to the Florida. They go to Vegas, and we got our strip clubs, we got the gambling and the casinos, and so this is a magnet for the criminal element.
Right.
Whether or not we try to keep it clean or whatnot, but to try to pretend that we're not a hub for sexual trafficking or human trafficking in general, I believe would be, pulling the wool over our own eyes.
Absolutely. And so, just as far as border control, that is very, very, very important that we have strict border control. There are so many different elements that are impacting, Nevada, because so often people talk about Texas and California, the ones that are, directly
impacted. We are only a couple dozen miles away if you take the right road.
Right. And, the statistics show per capita as far as drugs that are pouring in, the fentanyl that's being cut with all the other drugs, and how we are now seeing mass amounts of deaths because of it. And you're young.
A good kid, could have been you, a good student, does the right thing. And then they're at a party, and they're like, "Oh, I'll pop a pill. What is it? A painkiller? Okay,
Right.
And next thing you know, kids are literally dropping dead because there's a trace amount of fentanyl in it, which
it's overpowering. I was actually just at the Westgate when they were doing a kind of awareness for their daughter, who ended up dying from an overdose on fentanyl. And the Seagulls, it is heartbreaking to hear, their siblings as well, to see what happened. She was so young, and that's what's happening. And so the fight has to become personal, and the fact that we are mobilizing individuals in order to fight this. So we need to be identifying it. So often when we've done many kind of inquiries as to what's happening and why it's so rampant, a lot of the officers have said we are understaffed and we're not educated, because there's a point in being reactive and there's a point in being proactive. So reactive, they've gone in, so say on Super Bowl, a couple of Super Bowls ago, there were 30 kids missing. They were able to rescue 17. So that's reactive. But proactive means that we're training, we're securing the borders, we're seeing where the sources are, we're shutting down the rings, we're shutting down the availability, because obviously the internet kind of opens up a whole entire portal.
Better if those 30 kids never got abducted in the first place.
Exactly. And so that's kind of, there are many different steps in order to make sure that we do start ending and making this something that isn't so rampant across our entire world, to be honest.
And we're gonna get into your issues more, so I'm gonna let you talk more about building the wall. I know that's one of your big issues, and we're gonna talk about why. But let's get back to your biography just a little bit. I know that again, you were a beauty queen.
Yeah.
If I'm correct, you were, and I don't know, do you have some pictures? Great. You were Miss California in 2019, and now as I become more astute, because I'm starting to become a beauty queen expert.
Oh wow!
Oh yes, I've had Katie Williams, I've had Vasilia, I've had you, I've followed Lisa Song Sutton.
Yeah.
And just like everything else, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
It's very true. It's very true.
Especially with this beauty pageant thing. I mean, there's I don't even know how many. At least a dozen, I think. different organizations.
Yeah.
So, what was your organization and what did you specifically win as Miss California 2019 and Mrs. Nevada 2020? Do I have that correct?
Yeah. So,
all right, go ahead.
And so, but I'm going to go back. So one of the
Go
reasons, so the first pageant I won was actually Ms. North Hollywood, and that was the United States platform. And one of the things that I loved about that organization.
Is there a United States and a United States of America?
So there's U.S., so United States, USA, and U.S. of A. So U.S. of A is one of the more recent programs. And a lot of times, anytime you see an organization not really following through what they've said, that's when something else new comes along because they've been involved. They're frustrated about a certain program, so they create their...
like in boxing, you got the WBC, the WBC.
Yes.
Now, is there any way you could become undisputed and have all of them?
Meaning...
Like, can you win USOA, US, and USA?
Simultaneously, no. So you do have contracts.
So you can't unify the title.
Right, no.
So disappointed. I would like to see someone, maybe Vasilia, unify the title.
I mean, you can do triple crowns, so to speak.
1 year at a time. Because
Correct.
you wouldn't be able to do all the events
duties and
stuff
events
like that.
and things like that.
And then I understood, Vasilia taught me that USOA is a lot more conservative, and I know you're conservative. And, for example, they don't let 13 years and younger wear makeup, and they do a lot more personality type stuff. They do athletic wear as opposed to swimsuits.
Right.
So tell us about, you were the U.S.
United States.
Okay, tell us.
Really, they are big on philanthropy and giving back. And so I loved that. And one of the examples I have to just say, because so many people have a perception of what pageantry is, but I was blown away by how many incredible women were taking this stage side by side, talking about how many hours they've donated to giving back into their specific social injustice. And when, in fact, a tragedy struck the United States, which was Houston, when there was a hurricane that hit, I had a friend who was down there saying, Sharelle, you don't understand. The media is saying we don't need any of these donations, but they're not getting to the people who actually need them. And she's like, this is a list of what we need. So I mobilized. I reached out to friends. I reached out to my director of the U.S. system. Right. And we ended up getting a moving truck donated. We filled it with donations.
I saw a picture of you with all the stuff on the street. I saw they were cleaning up. The place was a disaster, literally a disaster area.
Right. And yeah, and that was the crazy thing is we took it down there. I thought we were just going to be giving out these things that these families needed, but we got there and their cars had been flooded, so they couldn't get to the donation centers, which was issue number one. But issue number two, when we started going around, they were living in this rotting filth,
mildew, moist, everything's wet,
right? And they
dirty.
didn't know, and they didn't know the information wasn't getting disseminated to them that they needed to cut things out by FEMA standards in order to get rid of it, so it wasn't spreading up into their walls. And so we went, and our team. So while we were there, we went from house to house where we could in a specific neighborhood.
Educating them as to how to save the home.
We did, but we were actually doing it. We were doing the demo with them for them. So we went in, and so we just started demoing. At some point, you just got to roll up your sleeves and get some stuff done. We had people who had donated some money.
100-pound Sharelle in there with a sledgehammer and her knife. And cutting the bottom of the drywall so it doesn't shred and stuff.
Yep. Absolutely. And so we went through there and we just tore through the houses, and it was incredible to see because people had donated enough and we had a little bit that was left over. So we chose one family to be able to re-drywall their home. And one of the individuals that was helping was a contractor. So, it was amazing to kind of show some pictures and show what was happening so that people did donate. Because obviously, as you know, so many charities and so many scams take place on GoFundMe, even as most recently. And so people were asking me, even at that time, is this money really going
to legit place, right?
Yeah, and so we tried to document as much as possible because for me I was like, well, why wouldn't it go? You
start realizing how nefarious this world could be.
Absolutely. And so, but that's just like one example of what pageantry looks like. Because I had even a young girl who was one of the teen queens, and she sent an entire box of her like stuffed animals and things for the kids. And it's just like people don't realize, it's just like, and the mom even says she went through all of her own stuff and hand selected that she
probably
could,
saved a favorite.
yeah,
and then
gave away
19 of them,
so many. But that's what was so incredible to me. And usually so many pageant queens, you know, the director herself came and brought a bunch of stuff.
Are you familiar with Victor Marx?
I'm not.
He's a Christian who goes over to Iraq and stuff and like helps a family got left by an ISIS fighter who ended up getting killed, and he takes care of the family, introduces them to Jesus, and they always got these sheep and lions so that way they could give away to the kids. It just rung a bell.
That's cute.
One last question about the beauty queen stuff, and I'm sure you've been asked this before, but you know, how did you feel about the first trans woman winning a beauty queen title here in Las Vegas or in Nevada?
I think that there's a couple of things to that. I like always going back to the rules. So the rules do state that you need to be a natural born woman. You know, that you're
like literally those are the words?
Well, I'll look it up, but it's you need to be a female. Women who've had kids, you know, just as far as in there, women who have had kids haven't been able to compete because that's part of the rules. So
you can't even have a kid. That'll get you out.
Correct.
But now, in order to pacify the woke mob...
Correct. And that's what's infuriating to me, is if in fact the rules were changed and there was a completely different system, but as a woman, you know, that was something that was a strict rule they enforced, and you would get your title taken away from you.
You may or may not agree with it, but that was the rule, and we're going to follow the rule.
Correct. And you know, to kind of go to a movie that gives this example quite well is, you know, I believe it was Minnie Driver who was in one, and they found out that she had a 2-year-old and they were going to take away her title because she had a 2-year-old. And it was kind of exposing how they edified supposedly women and powerful women, but as soon as you had a baby,
the most womanly thing you can do.
Correct, that you weren't allowed to compete in the USA system. And so I think that something that's really important is that if rules are going to be changed, that needs to be set in the future and then moving forward
and dealt with
and agreed upon and voted upon. But you know, you never ever saw them give that to
not an inch
to women who had babies or who had been married before or anything along those lines. And so for me, that is infuriating, and that is something that I'm really proud of, is competing in a system, having set lines, having the guidelines, and people adhering to that. You know, even you having to be a certain resident for a certain amount of time, you know, of each area. But I do want to kind of poke the bear in the sense of transitioning to, you know, transgenders in women's sports. That should not be allowed.
No matter. We're talking about, for example, the Yale swimmer.
Correct.
And that particular example, the gentleman was a varsity letterman.
Yes.
For the Ivy League swim team. I mean, this is like the top of the pinnacle of the mountain.
Right.
And then he takes a year off, pops some anti-testosterone pills or something, and then he's destroying the women the following year.
And as a woman, I take personal offense to that, because we should have every opportunity to break our own records, not have someone who is a natural born man and male to come in and take those titles and those opportunities from women who are competing in those sports. Again, it's all about, you can do what you'd like. We live in the United States of America. You can transition. You can do what you would like. But there's a hard line when it comes to... Yes.
You can do what you want when you're an adult.
Absolutely.
Kids do not have this.
Correct.
Kids have to listen to their parents.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely.
As an adult,
you do have those freedoms. And, you know, at that point, what needs to be done is looking for the future, and if in fact they do want to include this, there needs to be a completely separate category where in fact any gender can then come in and compete. That means males can come in.
Back to what you were saying is, can we talk about it
and
all come to a consensus?
Correct.
All of a sudden it's 2020 to 2022 and all right, we'll let a transgender in for the beauty pageant.
Right.
No discussion, no consensus.
None.
We're going to let a transgender play, women's sports, weightlifting or swimming. And meanwhile, it took, years and years and years of civil rights and stuff just to get equal funding for women's sports versus men's sports.
Which is still not here.
Right.
Which still doesn't exist.
It's a 40-year evolution.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, all of a sudden, this past 2 years, everything's changing on a dime without discussing. Same thing with, say, statues.
Yeah.
I got no if you want to take down a statue, I don't care if it's George Washington or, Abraham Lincoln. If you want to take down a statue, that's fine. But you have to go through the same process we had to put it up.
Right.
Let's present it to our local officials.
Thank you.
If you live in a community
Absolutely.
that wants to take it down, take it down. But to have one activist demand they take it down and then bowing down to it,
Right.
It doesn't make sense. We have a system in place for
Correct.
these things.
Which to your point, like just to kind of hammer that home, is there's a group of extremists that are dictating so many things that are happening. As so many people do the red versus blue, R versus D versus I, when in reality, there are extremists that are really hurting the foundations
It's
that
not
we
the
hold.
Democratic Party as a whole.
Correct.
Necessarily,
because that's a people. Democrats are still people. We're talking about extremists who are going after agendas that are really what's unraveling what we see as valuable.
Right. And as a conservative, and following this upcoming election, most conservatives are Christians.
Right.
A lot of people speak about God. A lot of people go to church. But I've found, as I've been following you over the past 6 months, that nobody is more pronunciated or more adamant or more forthcoming about their Christianity than you.
Mm-hmm.
You want to just talk a little bit about your evolution as a Christian? Were you this religious when you were younger? And, tell us just a little bit about why you're so adamant about constantly focusing on God rather than you're running for Senate, and I see more stuff about you campaigning for God than campaigning for yourself.
I would say that there's probably 2 or 3 pieces to that. One of the first pieces is, in short, my life was almost lost when I was born. I was going to be an identical twin. My life was spared at the age of 5 weeks old at the City of Hope Hospital in Los Angeles. And they had to cut out, several organs. And growing up, my mom had always told me that my life was spared for a reason. And
Did your twin sister survive?
No. And so... when I was 4 years old, I remember being in Sunday school. And in Sunday school, they told me about how this man gave his life for me. And as a little girl, I remember, I want to live like that man. And
that resonated
as a 4-year-old. And I said, I remember just saying, Jesus, come into my heart. Jesus, come into my heart. Because I wanted to make sure that this Jesus heard me. Because it was so important to me to have that relationship. And that's something I want to delineate is religion is rules. And you can do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. But relationship is this open conversation with the Father.
Did he hear you?
Absolutely. And that's kind of why I want to kind of transition it to, today and being in government. Politics has been something that people don't want to get in because they talk about how corrupt it is and how ugly it is and how cutthroat. And when in reality, government is something that is foundational. We are one nation under God, and we need to start raising up individuals who do have a relationship with God to bring that to the platform. It's not just a token. It's not just a pledge, but it is a relationship, and God is the master innovator. And so we bring innovation back to government. So when I'm saying that this is part of my platform and who that I am, because I want to open eyes that as I bring in new policies, as I bring in new pieces, it is foundational on how I make my decisions is because I am a Christian.
When we founded this country, first of all, I think it was 74 out of the 77 people who signed the Declaration of Independence were Christians. I think they all were Christians. 74 of the 77 were practicing Christians.
Okay.
And then when we first formed our government, I believe it was in 1791, when we first started having our elections and stuff. Well, it might have been 1789. We, 75% of the resolutions and motions and things that they did in Congress were prayers.
Yeah.
And thanking God for the country and following God in this aspect or another aspect. Whereas now God has gone so far from the halls of Congress, it's almost scary.
Right.
They're trying to get in God we trust off our country, off our
money. Yeah.
Trying to take God out of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Right.
Obviously, they've already succeeded in taking the 10 Commandments out of schools and Bibles out of schools.
Right.
And we were founded as a Christian nation.
Yeah.
We're not the separation of church and state is just simply saying that we're not going to mandate you must be a Christian.
Correct.
But we are supposed to be a Christian nation.
Yes.
And, I mean, I don't think it's breaking news to say we seem to be getting away from that.
Yeah.
How can you intertwine God and government without offending atheists or people who don't believe that should be a part of it, but meanwhile still trying to instill the humanity of God and the righteousness of God as a politician or as a government?
Yeah, I think two things. One of it is we bring honor back to the table. So often, I see people who represent the Christian, faith, and, it's kind of a bashing stance versus bringing honor to the table and saying, you know what, this is my faith, this is who I believe in, and this is what makes me who I am. This governs the decisions that I make. And so by doing that and saying that, it allows for a conversation to be had. And to your point about, offense, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, someone's going to be offended somewhere. And so I cannot, tailor to that. What I can say is, this is who I am, this is how I believe, this is what makes me who I am. Am I going to force this on you? No. But if you follow me, if you see me, you're going to know that it is a daily part of my life.
You think we're in Revelations right now?
So many people like to talk about that.
I thought I was throwing this question to see if somebody else has asked.
So many people talk about that just because of how divisive our world is, and I don't like to focus on that, to be very honest. What I like to focus on is who I'm supposed to be right now, and I am supposed to be a representative of who He is right now and bring that kingdom principle to earth, and that is to love people furiously, because that is who He is, and He's been misrepresented as this judge, which He is, at a certain point in time, but He is this loving Father, and that's what draws people to who He is how loving He is, not because He's going to stand over you and be like, I'm watching you, did you screw up, screw up? But, to kind of bring that into, the government aspect, I think that making sure that we have those morals, we have those things that we stand on, that allows and helps us to make those decisions as we're going forward, that we're not going to compromise. When we say something, we mean it. You actually make a promise and a commitment to a people, and you don't break that. And I think that that's really important.
And in your heart of hearts if you're doing the right thing or not. And I don't think enough people are recognizing the right thing, just more so what they could get away with.
Correct.
That leads me to a question. What if you believe in something? I mean, just hypothetically speaking, the Second Amendment. You believe in the Second Amendment. This is in your heart of hearts. Yeah. But then the people of Nevada, you're now our senator, and the people of Nevada overwhelmingly, and don't even necessarily use the Second Amendment, I just mean in general. You believe in one thing, and 70% of Nevadans who you represent believe in something else. What would you do in a situation like that?
I think one of the most important things is making sure that people know who you are when you go in. And that means that when you get there, if things change, some certain issues, if it's about water, if it's about, certain economic issues, then we take a look at it and see how we need to pivot, whether, gas, oil, when we're talking about nuclear and spent fuels, those are all things that you can revisit. But there are certain foundation moral principles that you don't get to revisit. This is who I am, this is who I will always be, and I will not compromise. There's a difference.
So if it's building an Amazon plant in North Las Vegas, you're open to ideas, and you might have an opinion one way or the other, but you could be swayed.
Right, which is the economic impact, yeah.
It doesn't matter if 100% of Nevadans want abortion, you're not going to vote for abortion.
Correct.
Gotcha. All right, well, let's get
But on that, I want to just say one piece, just as far as...
Abortion isn't... You want to address that?
I just want to really...
We're guessing you're pro-life.
I am pro-life. And so one thing, though, that I think that people don't realize just in the pro-life stance is people kind of, I'm pro-life, but it's like ambiguous. And then you bring up, these rape victims. Something that I always like to do is bring a solution or a plan to the table, because our party has so long just said I'm pro-life, and then we have
articulating what that means.
Correct. In addition to kind of going back and forth and just making an argument. So with that said, something that I think is really important is having Plan B readily available, because you don't then have to go through that process
starting over.
Right, because simply spoke, if you have had a rape case or something along those lines, God forbid, then you're not going through another tragedy, and we're not forcing you to go through another tragedy, because so often that's one of the things that extremists bring up, is that 0.001%, of statistics. And
rape or incest.
Right. And so having something readily available that is out there, no questions asked, you can utilize this. It allows for people to not have to go through another absolutely arduous and horrific process.
Right, and while I believe we're a Christian nation, you don't have to be Christian to live in this nation.
Correct.
Which is why we need to find solutions for everybody. But when
Correct.
you paint everybody with a broad brush,
yes,
it makes it very difficult.
Right.
Because, I heard this line, I'm going to start using it. I am the epitome, the super minority. The individual is the super minority.
Right.
No matter how far you break us down into boxes, you're always going to get back to the
Absolutely.
individual. And everybody has a different circumstance,
Yep.
whether it's incest or a rape or a date rape or a violent, there's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And you can't just paint the whole thing with one brush.
Which I'm glad you brought up, because that's what it is. And that's what we've lost the ability to do, is have a conversation about these broad strokes versus, okay, let's talk about individuals, talk about solutions and building plans around that.
And I'm sure I'm going to go off on a tangent. I want to talk about that too. But say even welfare or something.
Right.
There are some families that need to be on welfare for 5 years. And there's some families that need to be on welfare for 5 months that might take advantage of it for 5 years.
Right.
And it's so you can't just say, all right, well, 2 years, that's it.
Right.
Because there is a family that really needed that help for an extended period of time. It's not just about the people who are taking advantage. And we're gonna talk about this in a minute, the homeless, right?
Right.
From veterans to drug addicts to families down on their luck. All right, let's get into, because you're running for Senate,
right,
which is all federal policy and stuff like that. I wanted to just bring up a couple of things that are in the news right now.
Right.
So that way we can get your opinion on, if you were in Senate right now, what would be your opinion on these things? What would you be looking to get done? First, we're going to contrast what's going on right now with the truckers. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of the truckers?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Well,
freedom.
The freedoms are, you're going to get me banned off of YouTube. They're starting to say that freedom is the new dog whistle.
And the algorithm, yes.
Yes. So don't say freedom too many times.
Okay.
Because otherwise, if it shows up 20 times, we could get blocked.
Perfect.
All right. So this is a report from Canada just last week. Yep. And just yesterday, actually, this report is coming out of Canada.
Okay.
And I'll just let them play it so they can tell you what's going on. Play tape.
Hands up, don't shoot! Hands up, don't shoot! Hands up!
This was actually 2 years ago. The
third precinct of the Minneapolis Police Department on fire.
Continue.
Nearby businesses ablaze. This is how the night of May 28th unfolded. George Floyd's arrest and death in police custody on Monday set off protests in the Twin Cities. The protesters are demanding that criminal charges be brought against the officers involved.
Put their fists up! Yeah! We all here! All lives matter!
When that didn't happen on Thursday, some demonstrators escalated their tactics, while others tried to keep the peace.
The situation remains unchanged outside of the 3rd precinct. Just a group out there engaged in peaceful activity.
Police scanner audio and footage from outside the precinct provide insight into what happened.
9901 emergency. We got individuals breaching the gate at the 3rd precinct. We also got people trying to breach the front doors.
The police shoot tear gas from grenade launchers.
You want more of your people to die? You cowards! You want more of the people you're supposed to protect to die? You cowards! You!
This back and forth with protesters continues for about an hour.
They're about to breach the back gate. They're taking heavy rocks.
Heavy rocks. Please air the route that everyone should take.
Southbound. We're going southbound.
Copy. Evacuation route is southbound.
Around 10 p.m., the officers begin evacuating the precinct.
Everybody get garbage! Let's fill the top station with garbage! Burn it!
Airing information citywide. The 3rd precinct has been compromised.
3rd precinct is up in flames.
On Friday, one former officer was charged with murder and manslaughter in connection with George Floyd's death.
Of course he was, because, you know, they broke the law and the system takes time. But I would just want to transition and contrast this, that mostly peaceful protest, to the fringe minority of terrorists going up to Ottawa, Canada. Play a tape.
Thousands of people have been protesting in the capital over COVID rules. Truck drivers are at the centre of this. They've been blocking roads in Ottawa, and the authorities say it's got out of hand. There's now a state of emergency.
We're outnumbered, and we need to ensure that the order is brought back to our city, particularly as the first priority in the residential areas where these people have been subjected to this kind of boorish behavior.
And this is the kind of behavior the mayor's referring to.
There were reports of assaults, threats, mischief. There were hate-motivated incidents taking place. We have businesses that have been forced to shutter. We have residents that fear leaving their residence because of the intimidation.
But for the truck drivers, this is about a point of principle.
People should be able to make their own choice if to take the needle or not take the needle, and not lose the job, not lose their house, not lose their income, just for the vaccination.
While the protests continue, they're not new. This actually started last month when Justin Trudeau's government brought in a vaccine mandate for truckers arriving from the US. All Canadian truckers must be vaccinated to avoid a 14-day quarantine. And in protest, a loose coalition of truckers and conservative groups was formed. And what's been called the Freedom Convoy began making its way from Western Canada to Ottawa. Quickly, it was attracting support from much further afield. For example, many US conservative politicians have expressed their support for the truckers. Republican Senator Ted Cruz tweeted, "The government doesn't have the right to force you to comply with their arbitrary mandates." But this is also no longer just about the trucker vaccine mandate, but about COVID restrictions in general.
They're not just asking for an end to that mandate for truckers. They're calling for an end to all vaccine mandates, top to bottom, at every level of government, which is something that the Trudeau administration nationally can't even do.
The website Politico also reports that the movement is now wider than just vaccine mandates, writing, "It's quickly escalated into a global movement, incorporating a loose set of anti-establishment causes, coordinated on social media and encrypted messaging groups." And a broad idea underpins many of these causes.
I support the truckers because they're standing up for freedom. Our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has been violated in many, many ways.
For some, it's a stand for freedom. For Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, it's something different.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other.
Well, that phrase, fringe minority, has not gone down well in some quarters. Elon Musk tweeted, "It would appear that the so-called fringe minority is actually the government. If the government had the mandate of the people, there would be a significant counter-protest. There is not, therefore they do not." Well, Justin Trudeau does have a broad mandate. His Liberal Party failed to win a majority in the recent election, but it did form the government. Also, a recent opinion poll found that 68% of Canadians felt that they had very little in common with the truckers. The Canadian Trucking Alliance also tells us an estimated 85% of the 120,000 Canadian truckers who work cross-border are vaccinated. That is in line with the nearly 90% of Canadians overall. Nonetheless, as we can see, some truckers aren't happy, and nor are some Ottawa residents who want more done to end the protest.
They could prevent them from parking. They could prevent them from entering the city.
I lost my job 3 weeks ago.
Well, I'm losing my sanity because of you guys.
There's an impasse in that conversation.
Isn't
There's
that
an
great?
impasse overall. The truckers, for the moment, are staying.
The woman is losing her sanity because she can't find a parking spot,
Right.
which trumps that trucker losing his job.
Right.
And just to throw out a couple of stats before I let you go on a rant, because I'm sure you have plenty to say about this. When they surveyed the people at the over 500 Black Lives Matter protests, where over 35 people died as a result, $2 billion in businesses and property destroyed, 93% of the supporters, while 93% of them did not participate in violence, they supported the violence taking place by BLM and Antifa, where if you talk to the truckers, 0% of them support violence.
Right.
But they're being labeled as the terrorists,
Right.
while at the same time BLM is getting bail funds produced by our nominees for vice president.
Right.
What do you feel about these contrasting things, and what would you do as a senator? What would your message be as a senator?
There are two things that I think that are very glaring, and one is you see the rhetoric that went all over social media during the BLM and the protests, and again, the messaging was loud and clear. And I even had someone on my Facebook page specifically state they should skip over all Black-owned businesses and bash all the rest.
That sounds racist.
That was by a Black individual who
Right.
stated that. And, specifically, I think one of the biggest things is when we're talking about coming together, it is not about bashing or breaking down our community. That voice and in doing things like that is breaking down the fabric of our country, where we're supposed to be coming to the table and having a conversation about how we can move forward. Second piece, when you look at people losing their jobs and you look at the statistics and talking about them being mostly vaccinated, and it is about them being able to keep their choice alive. I don't want to use that other word, to get us banned, but to keep their choice alive. And, as a senator, something that's important is making sure that people come to the table and we have solutions. I do not want to keep debating, and that's what we keep doing in the Senate, is going back and forth and debate and debate and debate. We need to come together with a solution to ensure that we can get America, our country, and our world back on track, and something that's so fundamental as trucking and people bringing us our goods and the things that we need to live. It is important that they are taking this stand so that we can elevate it to the top of the agenda item and make sure that it gets addressed.
When I was trying to prepare this question for you, I was looking far and wide for some unbiased coverage.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you noticed, I kind of did. They kind of just reported what BLM was doing. They only reported what was going on with the truckers. But as a whole, the mainstream media is becoming an arm of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
Becoming very much so.
And when they talk about, say, BLM, it's written right in their paperwork that they are for dismantling the systems of the United States due to systematic racism, due to the government always being wrong, and they want to break down our entire way of doing things.
Right.
But then you have the truckers who are saying we are already guaranteed freedoms by this government, let's exercise them.
Absolutely.
And they're talking about how they're the threats to the system, and how the truckers are challenging the system and trying to overthrow the government. And Black Lives Matter was just an essential, necessary thing, whether we're going through a pandemic or not. It's a public health crisis.
Yeah.
And they're stating they want to destroy the government and rebuild our system.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand why it's the truckers they're talking about as trying to overthrow the government when they're trying to work within the rules. And BLM, who says they want to remake the system the way they think it's right, and they're not. The hypocrisy drives me nuts. What could we do about the coverage or the propaganda or the playing with words, changing definitions of racism mid-conversation so that way it could bolster their argument?
So I think one of the biggest things is to go internal. So we respond versus react. And in the Senate, we actually have to bring up these issues and start mobilizing, because that's when that news has to be shared. So it's not just directly trying to overtake, the rhetoric and the media, but you move and they have to report it. So you respond to what's happening. You respond to both of them with a very decisive force. So if they are bashing, in windows, if they are being violent, then we actually have to shut that down. Next piece is, when you're looking at the, freedom truckers, you make sure that you have a negotiation as to what's going on, that is met. And so we can, again, move forward. And then the news has to report on that. Either that, or if they don't, then you put that out yourself independently. But at some point, you can't just stand there and go back and forth and just argue both points. You actually have to come up with solutions. You move forward. You take something as massive as this display, and you respond.
Well, I mean, you brought this point up earlier, and you just said it again. I feel like Democrats and the DNC and this whole party machine that they got going are constantly looking. They're looking at 2030 for the Great Reset, to be, we don't own any property, everything's a service, not a product. And they have their eyes down the road, and they're always working towards something. And as Republicans, we totally tend to seem to respond and react and try to stop them from doing their stuff. But I mean, is that a fault of conservatism in general, that we're trying to preserve the Constitution and our way of life, so we're not really looking forward because we're trying to preserve the past? I mean, what is the solution to the Democrats' game planning decades ahead, if not a couple of years, a couple of months, whereas we're constantly trying to play catch up or respond to what they do?
I love that topic, and it is two pieces. So we've been reactive for way too long. So, instead of proactive. And being proactive means that we, in fact, need to come together. We need to bring a collective of candidates that are not your traditional, let me raise as much money as I possibly can, let me be as loud, and do nothing different, because that's what keeps happening. We've had the majority in both the House and the Senate and the presidency and have done nothing with it, because we're not moving forward. We're trying to not ruffle feathers, when in reality, we can then take our freedoms, we can establish them. Something as simple as making sure that people can call themselves whatever they would like to be called, with the rise of the pronoun movement. But you are not allowed to take away my right or my kid's right or any school to be able to say I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a she, I'm a her. And so
the basic tenets of vocabulary and language.
Basic.
If I see you, I assume I say, oh, she's, a
Correct.
pretty girl, or she's running for Senate.
Right. And in fact, if someone would like that to be that address to be changed, you can let them know, and then there's a respect factor there. But my point of saying that very, very, specifically is because we have not put innovative business people who take a plan and execute in our system. Because as conservatives, what I've looked around, and almost all of my friends that are conservatives, we are business owners focused on building our businesses, spending time with our family, and we aren't getting involved in government. And that is the problem.
We're serving our communities
in different ways, and we have to serve our community within the government as well. Even though, from the outside world, everyone wanted to hail me, support me as a pageant queen, and as soon as I step in and I declare, everyone wants to try to find out what's wrong with you, how how they can break you down, whatever that looks like.
If you thought that was bad as a pageant queen, it's about to get a lot worse.
Right, and it's the juxtaposition of, you just simply saying, I'm going to step up and I'm going to serve my country in the government aspect, and this is how I'm going to do it. But then what changes is us giving these younger generation the ability to look up to it and say, I want to be that again. Because at some point, that was something to aspire to be, was a government official who served their community, who served their country.
Well, I mean, you talk about joining the Senate. You're going to be involved. You were never in the military.
No.
I don't know about your overseas experience. Mm-hmm. Have you left the country, visited some places?
Yes, absolutely.
Right now, they're talking about as soon as tomorrow, and they're predicting sometime this week, that Russia is actually going to be invading Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I think we have a report that was just released yesterday, I believe. Let's see what they're saying about Russia and Ukraine. Play tape.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc. But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia if they further engage you.
I wanted to follow up briefly on a question asked by Bloomberg. You said that Russia would be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. Are you saying that a minor incursion by Russia into Ukrainian territory would not lead to the sanctions that you have threatened? Or are you effectively giving Putin permission to make a small incursion into the country?
Good question. That's how it did sound like, didn't it? The most important thing to do, big nations can't bluff, number one. Number two, the idea that we would do anything to split NATO, which would have a profound impact on profound impact on one of Putin's objectives is to weaken NATO, would be a big mistake.
All right, and my apologies. That was actually about a few months ago. And now fast forward to just yesterday. Let's see if the White House is still offering a minor incursion or if they think this is going to actually become a threat. Play tape.
We continue to see signs of Russian escalation, including new forces arriving at the Ukrainian border. As we've said before, we are in the window when an invasion could begin at any time, should Vladimir Putin decide to order it. I will not comment on the details of our intelligence information, but I do want to be clear. It could begin during the Olympics, despite a lot of speculation that it would only happen after the Olympics. As we've said before, we are ready either way. We are ready to continue results-oriented diplomacy that addresses the security concerns of the United States, Russia, and Europe, consistent with our values and with the principle of reciprocity. We've continued to make that clear to Russia in close coordination with our European allies and partners. We are also ready to respond decisively alongside those allies and partners should Russia choose to take military action. We encourage all American citizens who remain in Ukraine to depart immediately. We want to be crystal clear on this point. Any American in Ukraine should leave as soon as possible, and in any event in the next 24 to 48 hours. If a Russian attack on Ukraine proceeds, it is likely to begin with aerial bombing and missile attacks that could obviously kill civilians without regard to their nationality. A subsequent ground invasion would involve the onslaught of a massive force. With virtually no notice, communications to arrange a departure could be severed and commercial transit halted. No one would be able to count on air or rail or road departures once military action got underway. Now again, I'm not standing here and saying what is going to happen or not happen. I'm only standing here to say that the risk is now high enough and the threat is immediate enough that prudence demands that it is the time to leave now.
All right, so, I mean, I could go on, but whether we're talking about Ukraine or what happened previously in Afghanistan, what do you feel about foreign policy? What kind of experience do you bring to the table? And what are your opinions on what's going on since Biden took office?
I think that how we've been handling our military is a travesty. We have values, we have principles, we have promises that we've given them when they come in and serve, and then to leave them with no support makes me irate at best.
And I'm guessing you're referring to the leaving Bagram Air Force Base before we actually exited Afghanistan.
And exited properly. And if you look at, previous videos of even, the president talking about how we should have left or what at that time, how we should, be extracting, we did nothing of the sort. Again, it was almost this knee jerk and so many people got hurt in the process. And we still have, Americans there that are being stranded or left alone.
Referring to Ukraine specifically,
yes.
What do you feel about that?
So I think one of the biggest things, in Ukraine is making sure that we're getting the right information and the right data before we're jumping into a war. And that is the biggest piece, because right now there are so many different sides talking about different information. If you try to go to the source, again, there is mixed information coming out on all sides. Right. And that is what is hard from, the outside, because once you're in the Senate, you can actually, bring everyone that is needed to the table. And that's what we need to be doing, not letting the media dictate what we see and what we know, and then how we could potentially be in support or against something.
One thing that I have noticed that I haven't heard is, you got all these Baltic states and all these countries that were formerly of the USSR, and obviously Ukraine being one of them. I don't hear about them all banding together to defend Ukraine.
Right.
I've heard of other things, whether you're talking about Libya or the Sudan or Africa or Asia or the Middle East, where countries are constantly breaching each other's borders and having skirmishes, and we don't get involved in that. What is it about the Ukraine that has all of our attention, whereas if Nigeria was to invade Nigeria, it wouldn't even make the news telecast or our Facebook feeds? Why are we so concerned about Russia-Ukraine as opposed to another skirmish?
And that's a great point. And to be honest, I want to, speak directly in that right now so many things seem like it's conjecture. And so I do not want to misspeak at this point. You do see, again, pieces from both sides and trying to get the real data. And that's what I always want to do, is always want to come to you when I have all the information. Right now, I just see a cacophony, coming at us from sources, from news, even from the White House itself.
Right.
And so when I take a look at this, I want to make sure that we have the right information before we engage in any way, shape, or form. We already said we're sending 3,000 troops, over to Poland.
Right.
And I think we have to learn from history. We have to learn from our mistakes, and jumping in for special interests is not us learning from our mistakes.
Well, do you see a situation where you think it would be acceptable to have a hot war with Russia?
I mean, that's something that, again, I want to say it has to break down to what's going on, the reasoning, and why we should be involved. I like to look at everything. I'm a business person, and so I like all the data. So I don't like answering things without having all the data. I feel like we don't have all the data.
Well, then why don't we bring it back more domestically? We have inflation, rent.
Oh, we do?
Homes. We do. Actually, it's official. The worst in 40 years, 7.5% inflation. Used cars are up like 50%. New cars, you can't even get one because of supply chain shortages.
Right.
And homes in Las Vegas have tripled in the past 10 years. This is a recent report on our local affiliate. Play tape.
Rising faster now, more so than any other time in the last 40 years. Thanks for joining us live at 11. I'm Dave Corvassier.
And I'm Tricia Keene. The Consumer Price Index shows that inflation is affecting nearly every sector of the economy. And reporter Sean Delancey shows us how that price hike is hitting workers' wallets hard.
Inflation has risen faster and lasted longer than leadership at the Federal Reserve expected. And while they are moving to fight inflation soon, you may want to take up couponing as a hobby to avoid breaking the bank.
At Aguila Markets, both customers and employees are feeling the pinch of inflation.
You used to buy like 50 items with $20, and now you're buying 5 items with $100.
Francisco Duarte is cashier here and says caring for his family has gotten rough as inflation makes a trip to the register anywhere in the valley more and more painful.
Say you went to go get milk with the whole groceries, but at the end of the list, you can't afford your milk no more. So it just brings more down.
Duarte says his own store is seeing hikes in the aisles as their vendors bump prices as well. It hasn't been fun for customers who largely walk here shopping for elderly relatives.
It's obvious everybody can be expecting, sending their young ones to be buying their stuff and giving them only exact change.
The Consumer Price Index spiked faster in January than any time in the last 40 years.
Boom. It's here. It's higher than expected. And guess what? It's not going away anytime soon.
Al Lord says people should expect this trend to continue because any move by the Fed to fight inflation, like raising interest rates, will take time to affect prices. They also have to step lightly to avoid spooking Wall Street.
They have a really tough job now because if they move too quickly and too large a size, then it may help inflation, but they could crash the market here. They run the risk of throwing us into recession.
Now, the latest expectation of the Federal Reserve is that they may move to fight inflation by raising interest rates next month. Sean Delancey.
I mean, that sounds like too little, too late, and we have a lot to cover. So tell me, what could you as a senator do for the people of Nevada who I 100% believe we are being affected by inflation just as bad or worse than anybody else in the country?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest things that we have to realize is that we can't put Band-Aids on it. So right now, obviously, as we're looking at different things, we have to break it down because inflation, again, is a broad stroke conversation. So directly when you're talking about, say, cars, and making sure that we have chips made here so we're not being held hostage to a foreign company building these chips. So that way, the last report I saw, it was like about 47% was our used cars are up. So I think one of the biggest things that people need to realize is you take things piece by piece when you're in the Senate. You do not give a broad statement like, for instance, inflation only impacts the rich. So we take issue by issue, and we have to take direct plans and execution for each piece.
Well, if we can incentivize opening an Amazon warehouse in North Las Vegas, couldn't we incentivize building a microchip plant or something like that?
Exactly, which was kind of my point to the fact that that's where I can obviously not obviously, but if you've seen Samsung, that they're bringing the chip plant here and it is coming stateside, that's a huge move, but that's only one. We need to make sure that we are again being proactive and taking a look at all the other things that we're kind of held hostage on, which is causing some of the inflation, and making sure that we incentivize and bring that stateside.
So let's get more into your campaign. We have a primary coming up in June, and you're going to be running against, among some other people, Sam Brown, Captain Sam Brown. He's the gentleman who had his face blown off by an IED.
Yeah.
Great patriot. We have a former politician and perennial contender, Adam Laxalt. And, you raised $60,000. You got $10,000 cash on hand. Sam Brown raised $2.1 million. Adam Laxalt raised $2.7 million. Sam Brown, with all due respect, his face is very memorable. He's been on a lot of the nationwide TV shows. Adam Laxalt has got great name recognition due to the fact that he has already served. I mean, you are in a David versus Goliath type moment. What could you do with $10,000 to fight somebody like Laxalt, who's got $1.6 million ready to go today?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things that I want to shift here is that it isn't about how loud you can be, but it's how well you can mobilize. And you can do a lot with a little. And that's how I built every single company that I had from the ground up.
Well, I'm relatively new at this, but the pros or the people who have been around all this time say you can't win.
Right.
You can't win without the money. You can't win without the name recognition.
Right.
How are you going to overcome that?
So,
and how is it going so far?
It's going amazing. First and foremost, I want to just say that it is going absolutely amazing. And we have to do things differently. So I want to put a stake in the ground that that's what we have to do. So again, they have created this system. So if you look at the juxtaposition of the Democrat machine, so to speak, and they have over 5,000 fundraisers directly feeding to, their party and individuals.
We're going to get into how much money she has should you get through the primary.
Right. But I want to talk about the juxtaposition of something really quickly. But then we have about 1,000. So you multiply that, they put, some precinct heads to each, we're talking about 35 to 5,000. So they created this game, and now we're trying to play the game, and we're losing at this game. We're responding again instead of creating our own game. And so that's one of the biggest things that I want to initiate, is that we create a new game, and that we create it very directly. Do we need money? Absolutely. Are we going to utilize this money? Absolutely. But you need to use it in a very pointed manner versus a shotgun manner, and spending frivolously in this campaign. And then we have stuff left over. You have restrictions around it. And then what happens in the end is so much money was spent across all of these candidates in the primary. And then we get to the general when we all need to come together. And there's already been so much that has been spent in this first part, when we need to take a look, and a hard look, and we need to do it differently and watch the candidates. Because there's not just me, there's different candidates doing it differently. That's here in our state and nationwide.
But then, Sam Brown is a newcomer. He's never run for office before.
He actually has.
When
he ran in Texas and lost.
And that was in 2020?
I think it was 2016. Don't get me wrong.
Well, you're a lot closer than I am, because I thought he was kind of the new guy. Because my question was going to be, if Sam Brown is relatively new, as opposed to Adam Laxalt, who has been around the block for, I think, a dozen years or so, why wouldn't you run down ticket and get started, say, in Nevada Senate or even North Las Vegas mayor, or, you know, why wouldn't you do something where you can have an effect on human trafficking, on inflation, on Nevada as a whole? Why wouldn't you do something where you had, you know, we have, I think it's something like 20-something assembly candidate seats, the way we don't even have a candidate listed in any of these races, but meanwhile we have a whole bunch of good people, including yourself, of course. Why not run down ticket? Why swing for the fences today as opposed to trying to initiate change on a more local level?
So there's multiple pieces to that, but one of the first pieces is that if I thought for 1 second one of these individuals was actually going to go and be the change that we need right now, I would not be running in this office. Something that's very important to me is that we break the bystander effect, that we break this system of electing individuals who look good on paper versus people who are going to go in and do something differently. If you watch the other candidates, they're doing the same exact thing we've done throughout every single year. Take a look. Have they done anything different?
Right. Well, I mean, you tell me, what makes you a better candidate than, say, Sam Brown?
I am a business owner. And I am aggressively going after this because I took a look at the federal issues and how I want to impact our nation that does have a trickle-down effect. I also believe in collaborations and having an impact in the local level that doesn't necessarily need to be my job, so to speak, but I can actually impact because of my influence. So I want to use that from the trickle-down effect. I do not want to be a career politician, so I'm not looking to build my resume to someday then go into the Senate. I'm going in because I believe our freedoms and our liberties need to be addressed and protected today, in addition to being proactive versus reactive, in addition to having a plan and executing as a business person. That's what my expertise is in. So
you're saying you have a more broad expertise and you're better at gathering information from multiple sources, more like a CEO as opposed to a one-trick pony. And am I correct in assuming you're saying Sam Brown would be great for, say, foreign policy and stuff like that, but he might not have the well-roundedness of owning a business or whatnot?
So what I want to speak to is that I'm, thankful for his service. I don't want to speak to his background or, what his expertise is. I'm speaking to the fact that I'm thankful for his service, and I know that this is my calling for this season because we have been letting it kind of slip away slowly, and no one has stepped up aggressively to make sure that we have, like you were talking about, our freedoms and things from the past that are still intact, our family values, but also we're being progressive in building plans and moving forward.
What about Adam Maxwell?
What about him?
I mean, he has stepped up, maybe not aggressively, but he has served before. I talked about Sam Brown being, former military. He probably know a lot more than most about foreign policy, but maybe not so much about running a team or looking at economics, inflation, human trafficking, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
What is your opinion of what Adam Maxwell has done in the past, and what makes you a better candidate than him?
I would say, again, the juxtaposition is that when you have served and you have had an opportunity to serve and, the impact is what it is, when in reality, we need a different type of candidate in there. And that's what I want to say, very directly. We need a different type of candidate who's going to go in, isn't worried about election, re-election, how much money you can raise, and has that personal connection with the people and what we're going to do for our country, and not just looking at a career.
And if you're fortunate enough to get through this primary, you would go against Catherine Cortez Masto. Now, Catherine Cortez Masto has raised $17 million. She's got $10 million cash on hand.
Correct.
You've got $10,000 cash on hand. I mean, besides the obvious constitutional conservative message, what do you know about Catherine Cortez Masto? What is the things that bother you most about what she's done, and how can you beat her in a general election?
I think one of the biggest pieces is we need to look and see that she has voted downline on the ticket when it comes to everything that the Biden administration has done. And if you look at polling, almost the entire America is very disappointed.
At least 6 in 10.
Yes, is disappointed with the way they've handled almost every issue. So state and federal and, international. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I want to highlight is that we didn't have someone standing up for Nevadans. We didn't have someone, bringing anything to the table and saying, no, I'm not going to allow this to keep happening, voting in favor of the mandates. That is taking away our liberties that the Constitution has given us. And that's one of the things as far as, the juxtaposition and, bringing forth solutions. So not just saying that I'm not this person, but actually saying, hey, these are the things that I'm going to bring to the table as well.
You think you'd have a tougher time winning the primary, or if you won the primary, a tougher time winning the general?
Tougher time winning the primary.
I would agree. I have a feeling that, we're going to have a red wave, and I'm praying. What would you respond? Maybe not by Sam Brown, who's from Texas. Adam Laxalt has been in Nevada for a while, but especially if you were to go in the general election, you're relatively new to Nevada.
I'm very new to Nevada.
What's to stop the opposition from calling you a carpetbagger?
Nothing.
We had Dan Rotheimer coming here, and now he ran, he lost, he moved to Texas, he's running again over there. What makes you not Dan Rotheimer? What makes you, not necessarily a carpetbagger, but a true Nevadan?
I didn't move here to run for office. So that is simply put, that's why I'm not a carpetbagger.
You decided to run for office, and I live in Nevada.
Right. And that's what it was. It was me being involved. So I was involved with the party. I was hosting, different events and things along those lines to make sure that I could engage individuals and get involved in politics. And then I saw from the outside how broken it was, how much division was happening within our state. And I said, I have to step up. Otherwise, I will regret it the rest of my life.
Why didn't you start a podcast? That's what I did. All right. I want to talk about some of the things that are important to you. We're running out of time, but I definitely wanted to address each of the things that are most important to you and a couple of things that are important to me. First of all, we talked a little bit about it. Tell us about building the wall, how you feel about illegal immigration, and how that affects Nevada as well as the country as a whole.
So we're on kind of like a 2-minute warning. So, I want to just say that very aggressively, we need to be taking a look at securing our borders and anything just as far as one piece is going to be the illegal immigrants that are pouring through. We've had more than 2 million encounters.
Right.
And that's just encounters.
It could be double, but
could
at
be
least
double.
50% more.
Correct.
Ways.
Correct. And that is, in 2021, and then potentially we're on track in the same in 2022. We have fentanyl pouring in, which is causing deaths. We're talking about
not just among drug addicts, but among kids who are taking a pill for the first time in their life.
Our kids, are the vulnerable. In addition to another piece where our kids are vulnerable is human trafficking. Just flooding across the border, with it not being secured and tight enough. When we're talking about immigration, we always need to have a good immigration process, because that then gives people the hope that they can come across here legally. When we're incentivizing, when we're housing them, when we're not housing our veterans and we're housing illegal immigrants,
free cell phone, couple of bucks, traveling money.
This is absolutely abhorrent. And I will not stand for that. And that's why that border needs to be closed. And then we need to look at all the statistics, because I'm a numbers person like you are. Show me exactly each piece so that we can directly attack each one. I do not want to give a broad statement. I want direct attacks at each issue that we have that is impacting the border.
No, I mean, because we don't even mention criminality.
None.
Drug cartels, possibilities of terrorism,
right.
Yada, yada.
Which again is each issue needs to be addressed.
And that almost leads us to the funding of police. We talked a little bit about Black Lives Matter, and you support funding the police.
Yeah, but we need to make them heroes again. I think that's something that's really important, is giving those tangible ways for the kids to do ride-alongs, for the kids to see that they serve our community, that they're not these people that are just driving around trying to catch you and give you a ticket. They're trying to make sure you're safe. They're trying to make sure your streets are safe, and that is serving the community. So we elevate them to the heroes that they are.
Well, what about the juxtaposition of some of the progressive people saying that having too many cops at a school makes the kids feel like they're living in a prison, whereas I would tend to agree with you, not to put words in your mouth, that having a lot of cops at the school will humanize the cops and let them help them pick up their books. Or
correct, which is what we need to do, and that's where at this point we've gotten to such an extreme. We need to make sure that these kids do see them. They know that they're our friends and not our enemies, and we change the narrative.
All right, what about, you talk about infrastructure, which obviously is a big Democratic talking point. They say infrastructure is everything from child care to free community college.
Right.
But when I saw you talk about infrastructure, you were talking more about everything from small business to our water situation here in Nevada, which obviously we're almost running out of water.
Right.
What does infrastructure mean to you?
Our small businesses make up 40%. of our specific state when I'm talking about, Nevada. And something that's so important is that we take these restrictions off of them and allow them to thrive. And that's why even immigration is important when we're coming in, because they see this opportunity and there's no cap. But if we're strangling them with so many different rules and restrictions, then it dissuades some of these individuals from building that American dream that is so important. And small business is the foundation of our state and of our country.
And then quick about the water situation.
And the water situation, something that's really important, again, and I hate to be redundant, but it's being proactive versus reactive. So if we look at it, our timeline is about 10 years, we're going to be out of water. So we need to make sure that we're coming up with real solutions and answers, and not something that's this pie in the sky, desal. We actually need to make sure that we're taking a look, and if we actually do have to build an aqueduct, from another source in order to pour it into the Colorado, so we can make sure that we have water for the pieces which we were just talking about, to incentivize new businesses to come over and to build education, because what you're doing here in this facility is incredible, and making sure that we're partnering with small businesses, with schools, and elevating it, because right now our education is in the trash. When we used to be number 2, we need to make sure we're getting back to that again with some collaborations and partnerships.
That's a great point, and that brings me right into education. And people used to say, Nevada, and more specifically Clark County, education has always sucked.
Yeah.
And that's simply not the case.
Yeah.
We used to be one of the top school districts in the entire country. I think 1989 and 1991.
Right.
We were right up there. If not the top, we were in the top 5. So it's not like, Las Vegas just breeds bad schools. We, I don't know, purposefully, but we let this happen, and we've seen this happen right before our eyes, to the point where we've gone from one of the top school districts to our state, depending on what metric you use, is 49, 50, or even a 51st state.
Right.
As a math man, I know there's only 50. I know how that works, but it's my little joke. How do you get 51st when there's only 50 states? What else do you feel about education? Now, are you for school choice? Are you for, you talked about police in there. There's been an absolute onslaught of violence. You were talking to me in the green room about somebody getting stabbed 16 times. And I didn't even hear about that story. We're publishing stories about girls beating up other girls in math class, shootouts over at Sharelle High School. Yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily only a CCSD problem, but it seems to be exacerbated and worse here than it is countrywide. But it is a countrywide problem.
Right. And on the federal level, I do aggressively support, the dollar following, the child, in addition to that being homeschool as well. So again, I love the partnership when you're breaking it down to the local level, and I can advocate for that and elevate that. So when we take, that dollar amount, and a portion of that is going to our math tutors and pods and things along those lines, to make sure that these parents have the resources needed in order to make sure that they're able to teach the foundations and the values that they support, but also bringing in the experts in certain areas where they feel like they could be lacking, so they feel like their child is getting the best education possible.
Well, you talk about, the evolution of education and how things are changing literally by the minute, and pods. I mean, that's something I've never heard of 18 months ago, and now pods are a thing. Homeschooling, like you said, you were kind of the innovator. You did that way ahead of the curve, but people tend to be looking towards homeschooling options. And that's my question, is how would that work? I mean, if the money follows the kid, I understand, all right, I'm going to go to Bishop Gorman, the government sends your $7,000 to Bishop Gorman. I'm going to go to a charter school, we're going to send CCSD $7,000. But what about a parent who wants to homeschool and maybe sign their daughter up for dance classes, and sign their son up for math tutoring, and sign their, adopted child up for English as a second language class? How would that work with this voucher system? Would that even be able to be implemented? And what do you foresee? What would be your pie in the sky situation?
I absolutely do believe that we can follow it. The system isn't completely written out, but I do believe that as we take these dollar amounts that we can then submit. So we have, the Infinity, Math Institute. We have the
Infinity the math, math problem solutions.
So you take that and they allocate a certain amount to that group. You have them for their textbooks that they have at home. I was very spend that money at home, and then any of the additional outside you can submit that. So for the vouchers to go to them. So we have a system, we have a program. Obviously that's going to take money to develop out, but I believe that education is so important, and we need to start redirecting it versus us having, $40 million go missing at CCSD.
Just in case we didn't get kicked off of YouTube yet, let's talk about election integrity.
Uh-huh.
How do you feel about, do you think that there's anything wrong with the way we're doing elections? How do you feel about Nevada mass mailing out ballots,
right,
legalizing ballot harvesting? We had Stavros Anthony on last week, and he lost his election, 150,000 votes. He ended up losing by 12 votes.
Right.
And he's 100% certain. We had Alita Benson on
Yeah.
a few months ago talking about some specifics with 140,000 ballots that are in question, not necessarily wrong, but at least 140,000 in question.
In question.
We would like to at least know more about. How do you feel about election integrity here in Nevada as well as in the United States as a whole?
So many people are talking about it. What we need to do is make sure, again, we bring a solution to the table. So whether you agree that it was stolen or not, you even have, Chuck Schumer and his group that is trying to change the filibuster because, around, an issue like this. So specifically, my solution is that we build out a $3.9 billion stipend so that way we can make sure that anyone of that 11% or 21 million Americans that does not have an ID is supported in getting that ID or getting the supporting documentation to get that ID. And then they can be also a bonus is contributing members of society and start paying taxes with that, birth certificate and ID and get those paying jobs. It also includes a rollout. So every single dollar is accounted for. That's the highest side that the ACLU said that it would cost. So I like making sure that when I put something together, I'm not going to overshoot because as a business owner, when it comes to payroll day, I do not get to print out more money if I run out. I have to stick to that budget. So I make sure that that's a realistic budget that I can manage between, and it's a stipend, from the federal government that goes back to state and local government. It's not going to TVs or something frivolous. It's making sure that we are securing something as important as voting. And, both sides, could have an issue with that, but in reality, it is something that meets us in the middle and says, voter ID is necessary. It's necessary to get on a plane. It's going to be necessary for you to vote. And this stipend and this plan, and it includes a rollout. Right. Takes this point so we can take it off the table and we can feel confident in something as important as voting again.
And then, just hypothetically speaking, you're in the Senate and we have a majority. We have 55, 50, even say we're 51. Would you ever consider getting rid of the filibuster in order to help the conservative movement?
No.
Very good. And then one more thing I want to talk to you about. The re-entry from military and the problem of homelessness. How do you feel about that? I understand that you have a project geared towards helping military retirees, for lack of a better term, re-entering normal society. Why is that something you're so passionate about, and what does that entail?
I think something that's really important is when you take a look at something and you see that there's been an issue and, our military has been around since 1775 and we do not have a full comprehensive exit program built out. That is infuriating. These individuals fought for our freedom. Some gave all.
Right.
Some gave all, and now I spoke to so many different individuals. My grandpa served, fortunately he did, come back to us, but there's so many who didn't, or when they did, they weren't the same. And I was talking to someone who created Hives for Heroes, and he said, I had PTSD so bad I would just disappear. I would disappear for months at a time. And then he transitioned, he got a dog, in order to help him. So in that, building a comprehensive exit and reentry program, I am very passionate about, and that is a 6-month mental health support. That's number one. Number two, we actually are starting to support the certification process. So as we build that out, there are only a couple of different MOS or jobs, within the military that they calculate the hours and make sure they transfer into civilian life and being able to utilize them to work as soon as they step out.
Right. So, for example, if you're a nurse in the military,
correct.
Can you just get a job at a hospital when you leave the military?
Pretty much the best job you're going to get is an orderly when you've done triage, when you've seen it all. So I want to make sure that those hours are calculated, and then you can take that certification and take it. You can expound on that as far as with education, expand, correct, and utilize the GI Bill. So we need to expand the GI Bill as well because we have a bunch of trade programs and trade schools, correct, and expound that. And, it is also partnership. So making sure that I love collaborations. I love partnerships. So you take a look at Hives for Heroes, you took it Honor Foundation, all these different programs, and making sure that these individuals and representatives are coming and speaking during this exit program of that 6 month and positioning, saying, hey, these are the jobs we have available. These are the trade schools. So these are the trade jobs. This is how much you're going to get paid. This is how you can make it into a business. And so making sure that the entire piece, they're not giving everything. We kind of train them, so to speak, to go be hardlined, live this
and
life,
follow what they want to do.
Correct.
They don't have to follow up.
And then drop them on their head on the outside, and leave them, stranded, so to speak. So the reason why I'm so passionate is the reason why I get to build my business, my company, my family, and live in such an incredible country is because of them. And so I want to serve them.
All right. And I'm in big trouble. But I have 2 more things I have to ask you. All right. The first thing is I saw you on an interview a couple of months ago, and you gave the same answer. I asked you something. You said, I'm not totally abreast of that topic. I will look into it. I do my thing. I get my team.
Yeah.
I remember you didn't know something about, not that you didn't know that it existed, but you didn't know the answer to a question about DACA.
Yeah.
And I'm more asking you that since somebody brought that up, did you do your research? Not necessarily your position on it, you could include your position on it, but when somebody brings up a subject that you don't know about, do you go home and research it?
Right away. And I love that. And I love that you're even asking me, because someone had then asked me the same question and they're like, well, did you, forget or whatever? It's like, no, I didn't know that term, and I will never say I know something that I don't.
Right.
And there are so many questions and so many things that I don't know the answers to, but it is really simple to go to the experts, to research it and find out where you stand and how you're going to represent, but you still have your set of guidelines and how you're going to respond to each issue. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Good. And my last thing revolves around the CCRP. The first thing I wanted to say, and I don't even know if you know this, but I went to a meeting. I don't know if it was a First Friday or if it was a CCRP meeting. And when I walk in, I'm always late because I'm always working. I walk in at the end just to say hi to a couple of people, try to book some interviews, and I was standing at the front desk waiting for Joe McDonald.
Okay.
She's the master of ceremonies.
Yeah.
She knows what's going on, and I always check in with her before I do anything else. But obviously, she's a very busy woman. She was talking to someone, and I had worked for 13 hours. So I'm standing there thinking about how hungry I am, and and then as soon as my eyes focused, I realized me and you were staring at each other. Now, if you were a fat slob, I wouldn't be so, but because I realized, oh, this pretty girl must think I'm staring at her, I got a little blush. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Jeez, that's but I want to let you, not that you're not beautiful, but I wasn't staring at you. I was literally daydreaming. But that's not my question, although I'm glad I got a response. My question is, there's this tension between the old guard of the Say David, Say Jack, and Carrie Ann Buck and Ed Gonzalez, and this new guard, whether you're talking about Jesse Law or Mike McDonald or some of these people. Have you felt an odd pressure about who you take pictures with, or what groups you meet with, or people telling you who you should be talking to? Have you felt a weird juxtaposition by that? How has it affected you, and what's your opinion on, this infighting?
There is so much division, and I call it factions, and everyone has their opinions. Even within, you're like, oh, this person's good, this person's a rhino, this person's this. Everybody has their opinions. I know for a fact it's part of the reason why we keep losing.
I'm new to this. I'm guessing you're new to Nevada, and because you're running for the first time, so I'm guessing you might be somewhat in my boat. And I feel the same. I don't even know what's really going on because I haven't been around for the past 10 years. I heard this was going on in 2010 with the Ron Paul people and the Bush people, or whatever the case may be. And and how have you been dealing with that?
I think one of the biggest things is that as a Christian, and who I am, I'm going to love the person who comes in front of me. That doesn't mean I need to agree with them, align with them, but I am going to be representing them. And so that's what's really important, is for me to state who I am, what I'm doing, and where I'm trying to go, and really ignore, so to speak, a lot of the drama, because I can promise you, I get messages about, oh, this person's positioning to do this, or this person's positioning to do this, or you should, deny this publicly, or whatever, or this person's supporting you, and you shouldn't let this person support you, and just like all over the place. And it's from the factions, it's from outside the factions, It's just individuals, it's family feuds, it's like this family versus this family, the North versus the South, even within the...
concentrating on educating yourself on Ukraine, as opposed to educating yourself on, Carrie Ann and Jesse's tiff.
Oh, it is horrible, and it's sad because and that's the big thing, that even within the pieces you get mixed information from so many different people, and as a group we have to come together and we have to look at each other, we have to link arms, and we have to fight for our state, for our city, for our country, or we will lose it, and we're going to lose it on the schoolyard fighting amongst each other.
All right, and finally, only because maybe we didn't cover everything, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Why don't you tell the viewers why they should vote for you in the primary in June, and if you'd like to include why they should vote for you in November as well. The stage is yours.
The reason why I am running is because I'm here to fight for us, for our liberties, for our freedoms, and I need you to vote for me because you know that I have a plan and I'm going to execute. One of the biggest things is that we have to come together. I want to hear the people. I want to fight for the people and make sure that our family values, our Christian values, our Constitution are still intact as we move forward. Thank you so much. My name is Sharelle Mendenhall, and I'm running for United States Senate.
And where can we find out more about you? You want to run just a little bit of her website while she tells us where we can find this website?
Sharelle, 4Senate.com, and all of my social media is that as well.
Beautiful. And then finally, I just wanted to say, I know we went way over time. We've talked about 15 different subjects, and you were on point. You have no notes for those of you who is it Amy Coney Barrett? I just put this here for Sharelle if she wanted to take notes because I talked too much and maybe she wanted to jot something down or she'd forget. But I'm very impressed with the way you were able to just hit every issue with articulateness and intelligence, and I'm all for constitutional conservatism. So we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
And if you want more of this coverage, guys, we're going to be interviewing at least a couple of candidates every single week. We want you to get to know them, the real them, not a soundbite from the local news station, not just seeing what they have on their campaign flyer, but when they get asked the questions and the follow-ups and the current events, how do they respond? Are they articulate, or are they more like, I don't want to insult anybody, but are they more like our current president? No talking points, just real conversation. And if you like this kind of coverage, please, I need you to subscribe. Hit us up at thejohnnybrewshow@gmail.com. You can always text us or call us, but I prefer text, 702-501-5304. And make sure, again, you subscribe and hit the little bell on YouTube. We're also backing up our videos on Rumble. You can find us on Facebook, thejohnnybrewshow.com. And we really appreciate all the support you've been giving us. Please look these people up, take them seriously, and share with us what you think about the candidates running here. My name is John Brookhagen with Sharelle Mendenhall. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll get you tomorrow with Alan Bigelow running for Assembly. My name is John Brookhagen. Thanks for watching.